Welcome to Mind Body Besties, your weekly reset with real talk, a little laughter, and the kind of honest conversations you'd have with your closest friend. I'm Caty, a therapist.
And I'm Rachel, a naturopathic doctor. We're here to share the personal stories, struggles, and wins that have shaped our own health and happiness. This isn't a lecture, it's a safe space to slow down, connect, and feel a little more human again. So grab your coffee, get cozy, and let's reset together. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Mind Body Besties. We are going to be talking about OCD today, and we're going to cover if you have a friend or a partner who's struggling with OCD, what you can actually do to best support them. We're going to talk about OCD tendencies versus the official criteria of OCD, and even if you don't think you meet the criteria, how you might still have some of the neurotransmitter brain chemical imbalances that are associated with OCD. We're going to talk about potential root causes and what's going on in the brain. So this is going to be a really interesting episode. So let's dive in. Caty, this is mostly going to be you. Go ahead and can you just start us off with the definition of OCD?
Yeah, so OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's a mental health condition in which you have frequent unwanted thoughts that cause you to perform repetitive behaviors. So those thoughts are the obsessions and the repetitive behaviors are the compulsions. And to have OCD, you have to have both obsessions and compulsions. And basically what ends up happening is the obsessions cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and then people perform the compulsions to make that anxiety go away. And it does usually go away, but for a very short period of time. So they get stuck in this loop of feeling like they have to perform the compulsion over and over again to keep the anxiety away. So it really quickly can get kind of out of control for some people.
Okay. And is this something that people are noticing that they have to do these compulsions since they're a kid, or is this popping up later in life?
So for some people, yes, it starts early in childhood. Mostly what I've seen at least is those kids typically are on the autism spectrum as well, and they co-occur a lot of the time. Most people that I work with, they notice when they're like late teens, 15, 16, around then, they start noticing that they're having these obsessions and they're having to do the compulsions. And then sometimes it's not until like 20s or 30s. I think a lot of times people have the OCD tendencies when they're younger, but they don't realize it or it's not bad enough yet. And then when they hit 20s and 30s, it really starts to interfere with their life.
What about, I have a lot of friends who say like, I'm so OCD because they want things clean in their space. How do we know when it's truly OCD and it's a tendency or something else?
Yeah. So the term OCD gets misused a lot, and I don't think people mean anything by it, or they don't know that it could be a little bit offensive to someone with OCD. But people think that just because they like to keep their house clean, or maybe they clean it a lot, or they organize a lot, that means that they're OCD. And technically it could, it probably doesn't, because people with that would fall under contamination OCD. People with contamination OCD, one, don't want to spend all of their time cleaning and sanitizing and organizing. That's really distressing for them. And they're doing it not because they just like things to be clean. They're doing it because they think, if this isn't clean enough, I will touch something, I will get MRSA and I'll die. Or my kid will touch this and they'll get some horrible disease and they will die. So they're cleaning out of intense fear. The cleaning is the compulsion, and they don't want to be doing it.
Okay. And so you mentioned contamination. Are there other types of OCD?
Yeah, there are, I don't know, something like 15 subtypes. It's a lot. And these are the most common ones, which is why I think they've been made a subtype. OCD can latch on to anything. So if you're not hitting one of these categories, that doesn't mean that you don't have OCD. But there's, like I said, contamination OCD, symmetry and exactness, harm OCD, which is literally you're afraid that you're going to harm someone that you love. Like you might be in the kitchen and you might be chopping an onion and have the intrusive thought, what if I just stab my husband? And then you have to perform some compulsion, like negating the thought or saying, oh, I would never do that to make the anxiety go away. There's also scrupulosity OCD, which has to do with religion and morality, relationship OCD, magical thinking OCD, false memory OCD, pedophilia OCD, which we should talk about some of the more taboo subtypes because people don't like to talk about that, but there's tons of different subtypes.
Wow. And what's the magical OCD?
Yeah, so magical thinking OCD would be something like if I'm walking on the sidewalk and I don't skip all of the cracks in the sidewalk, if I step on one, my dad will die. Like those two things have
I
nothing,
remember that from like second grade. We would all be like, you have to skip the cracks.
right? Or if I walk under this ladder, I'm going to get in a car wreck later. It's things that they have nothing to do with each other. And for whatever reason, you have this obsession that someone might die or you might get hurt or you might get in a car wreck. So your mind just made up this thing that you have to do. And your brain says, yeah, that checks out. I will avoid all ladders or I will avoid cracks in the sidewalk to keep everyone in my family safe.
Okay. And is it always, we're always wanting to avoid a negative outcome, or could the magical thinking be like something great will happen if I do certain things?
No, so it's always going to be a negative outcome because whatever the intrusive thought is causes anxiety. So
Okay.
you're wanting something to not happen. So yeah, always negative. The magical thinking one is fun because people will come in and they're like, look, I fully realize that this makes no sense. It is not logical, but I have to keep doing this thing.
Right.
And
Right.
overall, OCD isn't logical. And I think a misconception is that people with OCD don't realize how illogical it is. No, they know.
Friends, partners, family members who have OCD, what can be done to make their experience the easiest possible or make them feel understood or just support them?
I think number one is setting aside time to talk with your partner, friend, whoever has OCD, and ask them what it feels like for them because they're not going to be able to give you a very logical explanation. And if you try to understand their way of thinking, that might get really confusing and frustrating. But ask them how it makes them feel. And then try to think of a time where you had those same feelings and like use some empathy. Having empathy for how they're feeling can be really helpful. And then a big one is asking them what you can do to help when they're trying to not do a compulsion. The biggest thing overall is a lot of people with OCD will ask for reassurance. They'll say, "Hey, did you watch the garage door go down? Did you see me turn off my hair straightener? This cough doesn't sound like I have lung cancer, right?" And they'll ask for reassurance over and over. And partners can get really frustrated because they're like, I've told you 20 times. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Or, yes, I saw the garage door go down. I took a video. And so if they cannot give reassurance and agree with the other person, like, hey, when you ask me for reassurance, I think it's best if I don't give it because it's making your compulsion worse. Every time I give you reassurance, it makes you feel better, but then you need it again 5 minutes later because that can start fights. People get really frustrated. And so, one of the biggest things is not giving reassurance, which I know sounds mean, but if you've both agreed on it and you understand where it's coming from, then that can be really helpful.
That is so interesting because when you were first talking about it, I thought you were going to say it's good to get reassurance. So that's so interesting.
No, it's like the worst. So with my clients, once I get to know them, we figured out what their obsessions and compulsions are. I'll talk about reassurance and they don't realize that they're asking me for reassurance over and over again. So I'll say, "Hey, did you notice you just asked for reassurance?" And they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I did." And I say, "I am not going to give it to you because it's not going to help you." And so they know that I'm not just being mean. I'm not trying to torture them, I'm working on an exposure with them by not giving them reassurance. And it
Yeah.
works really, really well.
Wow. Yeah. It's like a next level of awareness and responding to that. When
Mhm.
you were describing the potential conflict between partners, I was just thinking about how to a partner who doesn't have OCD, I could see that being perceived as the partner with OCD doesn't trust them, that they did close the garage or did do something. And then I could also see, from the person who has OCD, this frustration where it's not logical. And so not feeling seen or understood by your partner because they're not going to understand those feelings when there's that like logic barrier there. So I think
Yeah.
that being really difficult for people.
Yeah. And it is. I think if someone has a partner that wants to come to therapy with them to see like what they're working on in therapy and get some explanation from the therapist, I think that's also helpful if that's something they want to do.
Yeah, it does sound like that could be an amazing place for couples therapy. Well, I know before we hopped on here, we were talking about brain inflammation a little bit. And in
Yes.
the naturopathic holistic sphere, just knowing that brain inflammation worsens OCD. So anything that could increase your inflammation or cause inflammation in the gut, which shares an axis with the brain, could theoretically worsen OCD. What are your insights on what's potentially going on physically in the brain with OCD?
So the therapy community, when you say like what causes OCD, we say we don't know. And all that we know is that it's got something to do with your amygdala kicking you into fight or flight when it shouldn't be. So you see a situation that's not dangerous and your amygdala says it is. So, like earlier, I gave the example of the harm OCD. You're cutting an onion, you see a knife, and all of a sudden you have this horrible thought, what if I stab my husband with that knife? Then your brain puts you into fight or flight, you start panicking, and then you have to perform some compulsion, which could be, I don't know, maybe you say a prayer so that you won't do it. Maybe you, in your head, you have to say, I would never do that. I'm a good person. And that's your compulsion. So we know it's your amygdala. That's about as much as we know. So I have lots of questions for you about, if I've got a client that has made some progress, but maybe they've got pretty severe OCD and we've kind of hit a point where I feel like we're stuck. What else can we do? What supplements, what lifestyle changes, what's out there?
Yeah, good question. This is something I've been looking into a lot lately. So I'll start first with some of our suspected root causes and triggers from a holistic perspective. So, genetics, anything that's going to affect our brain chemicals, like how our serotonin is transported, autoimmune inflammation stuff like PANS pandas or post infection OCD, infections and toxins like Lyme or mold, stress and trauma and hormonal shifts, which I want to ask you more about later. And then gut brain dysfunction. So having issues absorbing or having gut bacteria that's imbalanced. So to me, when I look at the suspected list of all these root causes, they're all affecting our neurotransmitters, our brain chemical levels, which I think probably is the physical root cause behind some OCD tendencies and OCD criteria that actually meets the diagnosis. And I think OCD has multiple imbalances. So there's multiple brain chemical levels that are off. So the ones typically that I think we see the most would be low serotonin levels, because that actually contributes to intrusive thoughts and compulsions. And this is why SSRIs, medications that boost our serotonin, like Luvox, are first line for OCD. We also see high dopamine fueling repetitive behaviors. And so, again, this is not first line, but dopamine blocking meds like risperidone or Abilify are actually sometimes used in treatment resistant OCD because they're helping lower this excess dopamine. And then glutamate, having high or overactive glutamate can actually make us have stuck brain loops, which would also contribute to OCD. And so, what's interesting for this one is that one of our most studied supplements for OCD, which is NAC, N-acetylcysteine, It's also used for skin picking, nail biting, involuntarily wanting to pull out your hair. It's used for that kind of behavior as well. And I didn't know until I was looking up some stuff for this episode that NAC actually is working on the glutamate axis, not just on brain inflammation.
This sounds a
That's
lot like our ADHD episode.
it does. It does, except a little bit different. Usually ADHD is low dopamine, and this one we're usually having hyperactive
And that
dopamine.
makes sense
And same with glutamate. Yeah, it's high instead of low in ADHD.
because with ADHD, if you're inattentive versus OCD, hyperfixated or hyper aware,
Ooh, I love your connections
look
here.
at
Yes.
that.
Ooh, yeah, I
We've
think you're
unlocked
really
a
onto
code.
something here. And this is a super new area. Like, this is being so underutilized. So I wouldn't be surprised if 20 years from now, maybe someone who does some really cool research will listen to our episode and will research that. And then that'll be our main way to approach this, is we'll be able to classify it and know what's probably happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, they'll listen and be like, oh my God, they did it. They figured it out. They've solved the mental health crisis.
I love it. Some of the other things that we see are low GABA, which is our grounded, calming tone. And so if we don't have that break on our mental activity pressed down, then we get mental overactivity. So that one's, I think, in common with ADHD. ADHD, we
Mm.
usually have low GABA too. And then some of the other things are nutrient deficiencies. I'm curious, have you ever seen like nutrients, diet impact any of your clients with OCD?
None of my clients personally, but I have seen, I can't remember where I saw it, but there were a handful of people that were having OCD like symptoms who cut out certain foods from their diet. I think one was gluten, one was something else they were allergic to, and their OCD symptoms basically went away.
Amazing. That makes sense to me because that would lower brain inflammation.
Yeah.
Interesting. There's with other, mental health diagnoses, there's been studies about people who discover that they have celiac or they do have allergic reactions to food and they cut those foods out and then suddenly they don't have their diagnosis anymore. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
And I
Yeah.
have also seen, I think I said this on the ADHD episode, but people have gotten brain scans that have OCD and their amygdala is much larger than it should be because it's working so hard all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Some of the nutrient deficiency side of the picture, I think, is probably also overlooked too. And one of them that's usually low is vitamin D. And that gets me wondering if maybe if we looked at a map, if OCD is more common in places where we have less direct sun rays. So overall, the population usually has lower vitamin D. Like when I was in Oregon, we had barely any sun. So
Yeah.
I wonder if there'd be a correlation there too.
Yeah, I bet. And then, so you know how people are talking now about how food just doesn't have as many nutrients because our soil is so nutrient
Right.
depleted? Then I'm like, okay, so we all have this diet where we're not getting as many nutrients as we should be. Is that why this stuff is getting diagnosed so much more? Or is it just because maybe we didn't know what it was back then, so there was no diagnosis? There's just so many different avenues for all of this. It's way more complicated than I think most of us want to even believe. Like you can't just take a pill and fix it.
Yeah. And it sounds like even trying to understand it, we have that correlation causation
Right.
dilemma with so many different confounding variables. I do wonder, I mean, I'm looking at the list of nutrient deficiencies that have been associated with OCD. So low in B vitamins. And I'm thinking about how a lot of people in the population that have the MTHFR mutation are
Mhm.
getting more symptomatic, it seems, as time goes on. And that one's interesting because it's not even because of lower B vitamins in our food per se, but actually because our food is now fortified with fake B vitamins to try to
Yeah.
raise our vitamin levels. And so people with this MTHFR mutation are getting blocked by their real B vitamins because of these synthetic B vitamins being added to grains.
Okay, you know what's wild? I have a couple of friends that have OCD and they've been in therapy for a long time. They all have the MTHFR.
I bet I would not be surprised if there's a connection because you're going to have more brain inflammation if you
Yeah.
don't have these nutrients. You need B6, B12, folate to make your serotonin and dopamine, and you need those to just have normal brain function. So, yeah,
So many different things.
I know it's complex. And I feel like we're usually never looking at the whole picture. We're just looking at you have OCD, which SSRI do we try? Not are you eating rice that's fortified with folic acid instead of the real folate and it's blocking your
Yeah.
folate?
Yeah. I think this is a good segue into how therapists treat OCD and like what I do, because you can see it's not going to address a lot of these other things that we're talking about. But the gold standard for therapy is exposure and response prevention, ERP. And it is a type of CBT, but it's still very different than traditional CBT.
And for our listeners who
Basically,
don't know, CBT
is cognitive behavioral therapy.
yeah, like the
And
traditional what we think of.
yes, like, fixing automatic negative thoughts and distorted ways of thinking. That's what CBT is in a nutshell. But with exposure and response prevention, what we do is we figure out what your obsessions are and what your compulsions are. And it does not matter what the obsessions or compulsions are. We need to know them to build exposures. But it doesn't matter what they are. You're going to do ERP the same way every single time. So basically, you build a hierarchy of exposures starting from easiest to hardest, whatever the client deems to be a quote easy exposure, up to something that they just can't imagine themselves doing right now. And then we do those exposures in session. We might leave the office if we need to do an exposure out in the wild, or it's something we might be able to do in the office. So, and the easiest example is if someone has contamination OCD, which is common, but actually not that common, but it's the easiest one to explain with. So maybe someone is afraid of germs on a doorknob. So I'll have them come in and maybe they'll watch me clean my doorknob on my door and I'll say, all right, go touch it. And then don't wash your hands. So the obsession is germs. The compulsion would be hand washing. Then maybe the next time I don't clean my doorknob and I say, okay, go touch it, really get in there and touch that doorknob. And then you have to wait 5 minutes and then you can wash your hands one time. And then we'll go up from there to where ideally I'd be like, all right, go through the office, go touch all the doorknobs and then don't wash your hands until you get home and it would be natural for you to wash your hands. And basically what you're doing is you're teaching the amygdala to not go into fight or flight, to not see the doorknob and immediately be like, oh, danger, danger. And so it's down regulating the nervous system so that eventually they can do this thing without washing their hand 10 times.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that's what we do. And it does work. It 100% works. I don't think I've ever had a client that didn't at least get a little bit better. But then sometimes I do have clients with really severe OCD that seems to latch on to just everything. It'll switch and change subtypes. And those are the people where I've noticed, like, hey, I think we need a little bit more. So that's when I would love to send them to someone like you that can do some testing, can give them some supplements, because some people just need more. It's just more complicated for them.
That makes sense. And when you're describing the exposure therapy, I mean, the first thing that popped into my brain was that you'd need to really be working with someone that you like and a therapist that you
Yeah.
trust, because you wouldn't want someone just telling you to do these things that are your brain really doesn't want to do them. So you've really got to like the person you're working with.
Yeah. And I make it sound so easy. Like you come in, you do it the next time. No, sometimes we spend weeks working up to the very first exposure. People get really distressed. The goal is to not ever let them panic so much they have a panic attack, but they'll get pretty close. And so we work on, nervous system regulation, do some deep breathing. What can we do? And just sit with the sit with how uncomfortable you are until it starts to subside. And every time you're able to do that, you're making progress. You're getting closer to that next exposure. But it is incredibly distressing for people. So I don't want to make it sound so easy. It is very
Right.
hard.
Yeah. And from my perspective, it sounds like the brain is stuck in survival mode. And so I wonder too what's going on with the rest of the body physically, because once our brain is switched into survival mode, all of our cells go into survival mode and we can't regulate our hormones and our immune system shuts down. So I'd imagine it could have health impacts as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for everyone out there, imagine if you've ever had a panic attack, imagine that, and then take it down a couple notches. And imagine feeling like that most of the day, every day, with just little tasks you have to do. Maybe it's every time you leave the house, you think you left your straightener on and the house is going to burn down. For some people, I've had people every time they hit a bump in the road, they're convinced it was a body and they ran over someone. So getting to work is hard and it impacts their life because they're getting out of the car every time to check or they're circling around to make sure they don't see a body and they're not getting to work on time. Then they're in trouble because they can't get to work on time. And so it impacts all these aspects of their life.
Definitely sounds really far reaching.
Yeah.
Two of the areas that I'm curious for your take on. I'm curious what you think about the relationship between stress and trauma and OCD, and then also the hormonal shifts, because that's so interesting and makes sense physically. But I'm wondering how that is, how that looks if someone's having hormonal shifts that are leading to OCD.
Yeah. So for hormonal shifts, people get postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. You can also develop postpartum OCD. And that was something I did not know until I was pregnant and I found it somewhere and I was like, "Oh my God, I hope that doesn't happen." But it makes sense. You're having these big hormonal fluctuations and usually with postpartum OCD, it's tied to the new baby. So it might be if I don't set them down in their crib the exact right way, they're gonna roll over and suffocate, which is horrible. No new mom wants that thought. Or maybe they're afraid to even pick their baby up because if I walk around with them, I'm gonna drop them. And then it causes them to do some compulsion like, okay, now I have to pray compulsively to make sure this doesn't happen. Or now it could even be now I have to go, turn the light on in their room 10 times so this doesn't happen. So that's kind of the hormonal side. Usually it's postpartum. And then what was the other one?
Oh, the stress and the trauma.
Yes, I think for sure stress makes all of this worse because you're just not able to cope as well. You're going to get anxious faster. It's going to feel more intense. A lot of my clients with OCD have past trauma, and it's like it put them on high alert and they're hyper vigilant because of the trauma. So they've got PTSD already. And then that like almost morphs into, okay, now I'm going to be hyper vigilant about this really weird thing. And it becomes OCD because they've got to now figure out a way to get rid of the anxiety. In comes this compulsion. And then they're trapped in a loop doing it over and over again. So I think if you already have high anxiety, high stress, trauma, I think all of that just really starts fueling OCD tendencies. I don't know that one necessarily causes the other, but it certainly doesn't help.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about, is there any overlap between eating disorders and OCD?
Yeah. So sometimes people get misdiagnosed with an eating disorder when they actually have OCD. So that can look like having some foods are safe and some are not safe. Or someone is so afraid of food being contaminated that they stop eating, they lose weight, and it looks like an eating disorder. They might also like my food can't touch kind of thing. If it touches, I'll get sick or whatever it is. So that can be confusing. In college, I had an eating disorder for a couple years and I started developing some OCD like tendencies where there were good foods and bad foods. I had to eat at certain times. I can't remember what the times were, but those are the only times of day I could eat. And it wasn't like if I eat at 5 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock, I'm going to gain weight. It was, it's just not right. It doesn't feel right. So I had extreme control over when I ate and what I ate. And I think if like I would avoid going out to eat. So avoidance can be a compulsion. I would avoid going out to eat, or I would just straight up lie and say, I don't like that kind of food. Like I don't like chips or I don't like whatever it is. So then no one asked any questions and I didn't have to eat because it wasn't the right time to eat or the right food to eat. So it became like a just right kind of situation.
Yeah.
And I would have never met full criteria for OCD, but I definitely had the tendencies there. And I suppose it could have gotten a lot worse. I just eventually realized one day, like, I've stopped doing this. This is so stressful. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but looking back at it, I was slowly doing exposures myself by like eating at a different time or eating a different food and seeing, oh, look, you're fine. Nothing bad happened. And I kind of did my own exposures until it went away.
So you were a therapist even before you were a therapist.
Right? Yeah. No, and I had no idea what was going on. I would have never explained that to anyone because I was like, I sound crazy. Like, this is ridiculous. Other people can eat whatever they want and go out to eat and they're not freaking out, but I am. And so that's another reason it goes undiagnosed, because people are embarrassed to talk about their compulsions or their
Wow.
obsessions.
Yeah, yeah, it's like hard if you know something's not logical, but your brain still keeps going there. So for any listeners who think that they might have OCD or they might have OCD tendencies, what would you recommend as a first step for them?
First, I would find a therapist and they should do the Yale Brown obsessive compulsive scale. The Y box, that's the like standard assessment that should be done. I will say it is important to note, if you know already that you have autism, they cannot use that scale because it will say you have OCD even if you don't. So something to note, anything else will be fine. But if you do that assessment and you answer truthfully, that assessment will tell you where you score. And it goes from like mild to severe. And the questions are like really specific. So it'll ask things that you probably never thought of or never realized might be part of your OCD.
And at what point do you notice people feeling like they've fully gained their lives back and they feel like this isn't affecting their life? Like, is there a time period or how many sessions before they should think about maybe physical causes or brain inflammation? I know there's no hard data on any of this. We're just like giving our
Right.
educated opinions.
No, that's a good question. So in the trainings that I've done, everyone seems to land at about 20 sessions. And after 20, you should have made significant progress. If you're going home and doing exposures yourself in between, you're really giving it your all, within 20 sessions, you should have significant progress. And if you don't, then I would definitely start looking into other things. If it were me, I'd probably just do all of it at once to make the most progress I could. But after 20, I would start looking into other things for sure.
That's helpful. Okay. Well, I'll link below the NAC supplement just in case anyone is curious about that. Obviously, ask your doctor, but the trials that have been done show using about 2,400 to 3,000 milligrams a day divided up. So I'll link that below. And I think we've talked about some great stuff here.
Yeah, and I'll put the name of the assessment.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today.
Yep, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly reset. If you loved hanging out with us today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and share this with a friend who could use a little calm and connection too.
This show is for education and inspiration, not medical advice. To learn more or connect with us, check out the show notes below. Until next time, take care of your mind, your body, and your heart.